Well, Happy New Year. Have you made any mistakes yet this year?
That's a really good question.
We're only
Um,
5 days into it, right?
yeah, I think maybe coming home from Europe.
Oh, yeah, right. I like that.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So I'm just for everybody to know, I'm a little under the weather. I've had a cold for a couple weeks now, and so it's been hard to make any mistakes when you're sitting on the couch and laying in
Yeah.
bed. So
Yeah.
it's been a little bit tough, but you know maybe we'll start the year off this way. Now I'll be great after this. How about you? Any mistakes?
I can't think of any yet this year, so it's been a perfect run so far. So,
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I have not lost a race this
yeah,
year.
yeah, there you go.
It's been pretty good. I don't think I haven't made anyone cry yet this year, so that's
Yeah,
pretty good for me. I tend to make a lot of students cry,
yeah,
so yeah, it's been pretty good so far.
that's good. Yeah, so far so good. Well, but 2024, boy, it's amazing how all of a sudden you look down the calendar and you're like, oh, we got some things going and things
Yeah,
coming up pretty quick, and all of a sudden you try to figure out where your plan is and what you're doing for the year. Triathlon is such a year-round sport, especially here in the Southwest. I mean,
yeah,
people start racing March, April, and then they race all the way through December. I
yeah.
think really, I don't know anyone who's raced in January. But outside of January, it's pretty much someone's finding a race somewhere.
Yeah, and well, the racing really starts. Yeah, in February you can go down to San Diego and race.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So I think January is pretty much the only month that in the
Yeah,
Southwest there's not an actual triathlon. But you could be doing running races for
yeah.
sure. And
100 is usually in January.
yeah, there's lots of things. But you're right, it sneaks up on you. And I'm not doing Oceanside this year,
Hmm.
but that one always snuck up on me
Yeah,
because it's April. I got a lot of time,
yeah,
but it's the first weekend of April, and from now to there, it's like 12 weeks,
yeah.
and that'll jump out and get you.
Oh, no, that's right. And I think this is our topic well, it is our topic for tonight is getting ready for 70.3.
Yep.
And it is amazing how when you do that, you look at Oceanside or you look at St. George, some are popular local 70.3s to go after. Yeah, you've got to start looking at your training plan and think about how you're going to prep because it's a long-term process. You don't try to cram everything in 2 or 3 weeks before a 70.3. Maybe a sprint race you can get by that way, but a 70.3 is something that you really got to spend some time on planning.
No, for sure. The athletes that I work with that are doing, say, both those two races, I mean, the plan is already in motion for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And that's going to be making them successful, right? It's like
Hmm.
we've trained through December, we trained through January, and one of the things that just kind of throw out to start with is we're already thinking about that,
Yeah.
right? Like the goal races they're on the calendar,
Hmm.
and I don't just have like this nebulous um, just base train.
Yeah.
We have a proper off season, and then it's like let's build and let's
Hmm.
build towards these races. But the nice thing is that this time of year, I at least with the people that I work with and myself, I don't have them do really anything super long
Hmm.
at this time. It's hard, because like for example, if they're long rides on a Sunday,
Hmm.
um, you don't know what the weather's going to be. I mean, it could be rainy and 40 degrees, and you put down a 5 hour ride, and it's like, well, that's not going to be successful.
Hmm.
And even going indoors, and there's a few people I coach out of state that are only indoors right now. I can't have them do 5 hour rides
Right.
indoors. Like just could they do it? Yeah, but it's just beats you up,
The
mentally.
mental strain on top of the physical. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to think about that stuff, and you
Yeah.
think about the daylight, and
Hmm.
even riding in the midweek. It's hard to get in a ride that's not indoors.
Hmm.
And once again, I've got a few people that just hate riding indoors,
Yeah.
and so you have to really think about that as you start to prepare for a 70.3 as you're preparing through the winter.
Hmm.
And once again, John, you're right. We live in the Southwest, and we're pretty blessed that we can, for the most part, even train outside year round.
Yeah, that's right.
But it does pose some more challenges.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it is, and I like this idea of just being prepared. Keeping your training going in your off season, not doing the serious training, but still keeping things moving forward, and so that you are ready for that training program. Because starting from zero is different than starting from something,
Yeah.
and I think that's obviously good working with the athletes that you work with year round. But what about athletes who maybe are looking to make a New Year's resolution of doing a 70.3? And I mentioned 70.3 because one of our favorite listeners, Rick Simpson, posted a nice link to some free 70.3 training programs. I actually poked around and then looked and see what they were. And I think that's sort of neat to have some different resources for people to access to get ready for 70.3. But do you have anyone that has approached you and says, "Hey, I'm starting triathlon from scratch and I'm looking to a 70.3 in 8 weeks"?
Yeah, and then I tell them no.
Yeah,
If they're starting from scratch, to me that's a no.
yeah.
And it's a no. Just me personally, I don't think that that's good for the sport, and I don't think it's good for that individual person.
Mhm.
Even if I think they can do it,
Yeah.
I would always say, hey, let's aim a little lower to begin
Mhm.
with, so you're successful when we do a first 70.3.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so my answer is always no to that one. And I've had it happen. I've had people like, hey, call me up there. Hey, I heard you do triathlon coaching. I want to do a 70.3 in 6 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like,
Right.
okay, like what's your background? Well, I'm a swimmer. Okay,
Mhm.
great. Like, have you done triathlon before? No, no, but my friends are doing this race and I want to do it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not your coach.
Right.
I'm not the person for you if that's your goal. And some of the, and I've turned down people for coaching, especially those type of people, and they're like, well, I'm just going to do it and then I'm done. Like I want to do that one time and I'm done with
Right.
the sport.
Hmm.
That's not me.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. Like you and I are both lifestyle
Right.
people, and
Hmm.
I mean, personally, I don't think I'd really enjoy working with people short term.
Yeah.
But
It's
so
a different
I would
approach.
tell them no.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I like that, and it's a different approach if you are just doing a one and done. And I think doing that type of approach, there's lots of different training that you can do for that type of event. But I think what we want to talk about tonight is how do you have a successful 70.3. Maybe it's your first 70.3, but you're not starting from scratch. You've already
Right.
got some training, you've maybe have a couple of races under your belt, and now you're thinking of moving forward. So you have some triathlon background.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to preface this because, this was kind of one of my New Year's resolutions, John, was on the podcast to once again tell people that sprint triathlon is real
Yeah.
and it's fun and
Mm-hmm.
it's competitive and there's
Yep.
a World Cup for it, World Triathlon Series for
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, and it's not just, oh, I just did a sprint and I'm not good if I don't do a
Yeah.
70.3, or
Right. Right.
I'm not a triathlete if I haven't done an Ironman or a
Mm-hmm.
half Ironman. No, that's not a thing in my brain. So
Mm-hmm.
just because somebody wants to do a 70.3, I always tell people, like, you don't have to do one to legitimize yourself as a triathlete.
That's right. No,
If
totally.
you
And I even think back on my triathlon career. I have two careers, pre kids and post kids. The first part of my career was all sprint and Olympics.
yeah,
I raced throughout the 80s and early 90s, and that's all I did was sprint and Olympics, and was very much enjoyed the sport and had a lot of great accomplishments. It wasn't until I returned the second time to take up triathlon, and then I finally did an iron distance event. So it was whatever 25 years, 24 years since my first race. I actually did the first Ironman.
yeah. And if you'd never done an Ironman and never done a 70.3, and let's say you
Yeah,
did 5, 6 sprint or Olympic races a year, you'd
yeah,
be content. I know
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Like
Hmm.
you'd be happy with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I just want to preface that, and that'll be one of the themes
No,
for
I
the
love it. That's great. That's a good way. So we don't want to come across as, hey, you should always try to work
right.
towards this event. What I think we're doing is we're seeing the popularity of events like 70.3, and I think it's good to talk about,
Yeah.
how to prepare for that to be successful. But
Yeah, yeah,
it's not the end goal for everybody.
because it is a little bit different.
Yep.
The distance is a little bit different. I don't know if I've ever told you when I did my first 70.3. Um, it was a weird experience as far as why I chose to do it.
Hmm.
And I was doing sprint and Olympic racing, and I was getting fast and getting better, and enjoying the heck out of it. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
like I loved going to the races, and this person I was training with is like, hey, you should really think about doing 70.3 because you don't get penalized as much for being a bad swimmer.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
he's like, do the math. He's like, it's
Yeah.
only like a 400 yards further to swim than an Olympic, but you're a good runner and a good cyclist. Like it'll be beneficial for you to do this.
Yeah.
So it was more about, oh, I can be successful at that
Hmm.
more so than doing Olympic and sprint racing. And yeah, now I've done like, I don't know, 25
Yeah.
70.3s. And so, and I really enjoy 70.3 racing.
Hmm.
But that being said, I probably enjoy sprint racing more,
Yeah. Yeah. I
like
love
just
this.
out of pure joy.
I love the sprint. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. If honestly, if you were to say, hey, next weekend we're doing a race and I was fit for both and I could choose, I would choose a sprint race for if
Hmm.
it's just pure enjoyment. Now,
Yeah.
a 70.3, I get a different enjoyment out of it
Hmm.
because it's to me, it's a different, honestly, it's a triathlon, but it's a completely different thing than a
Yeah.
sprint. In
Hmm.
that, like, there's so much more tactics and planning and pacing becomes so much more important.
Hmm.
And even like knowing the course and race prep, and it's just different.
Yeah.
But so it's a different type of enjoyment, I guess.
No, totally. And so building a training program has to reflect that. And there you have to respect that a 70.3 is different than a sprint, and preparing for one or the other. I mean, you can obviously have a lot of overlap in what you're doing, but at the end of the day, to build a 70.3 program, you do need to account for some of those tactics and some of the pacing issues that you got to deal with, and obviously nutrition as well.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and just different than a sprint race. So where do you want to
Especially,
start with this?
well, I think figuring out like where you're at today,
Hmm.
right? So if, for example, you've done several Olympic races last year, or Olympic and sprint races, and you feel like, hey, I'm successful and I'm kind of where I wanted to be for those races. It's, I guess, a little bit different if you were just struggling to finish those, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'd worked with a few people in the last few years that they were their goal was to do a 70.3, and when they finally did their first Olympic, they barely finished it.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, we need to re-examine things.
Yeah.
And then I've also had people that crushed their Olympic race, and they're like, okay, let's go on to the 70.3. So I think it's very much, you have to look inside yourself
Hmm.
and to determine it, because if you're barely finishing an Olympic race and it's
Hmm.
taking every bit of mental fortitude you have and physical ability you have to finish that, it's going to be a different training program for you than, yeah, the other person.
No, I love it. You have to do a lot of self-reflection to build your program, because a lot of your program is built, and even the free program I looked at, it's built on your perceived exertion, or what level of exercise, what level of intensity you feel you can do, and so you got to take a step back and figure out what that is. So
Yeah, and if you think about your first 70.3, most people that I've worked with and been around, their first time, they're looking at between or right around 6 hours, maybe between six and
yeah.
7 hours. So I think the first question you need to ask yourself is, can you exercise for 6 hours straight?
Mm-hmm.
Can you do anything for 6 hours straight?
Mm-hmm.
Like, John, I don't like going to two movies in a row.
Yeah. Right.
Right? That's 4 hours sitting in a comfortable theater and air conditioning. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not really too comfortable here. Like, you want to do another movie? No, I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
so you really have to start to think about that. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first thing, is like, can you mentally endure first first of all, because that's a long time.
Yep.
And one of the things that I would look for in building a training program is, can you get to a point where you could exercise maybe not 6 hours, but
Mm-hmm.
5
Yep.
in a row? And so if you can only do 3 now, slowly trying to think about building just time
Mm-hmm.
and not even thinking about, how fast I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can I get on my bike? And the bike is the obvious one to do, right? Can I get on my bike and can I stay out there for 5 hours?
Yep.
Because if you can't do that kind of in training, it's a big ask for you to jump and do it in a race.
And I love it because it's not that you're saying you can't do it. It's that right now you do not have the fitness or the skill set or whatever it is to be able to do a 17.3. So right now, time zero, now you've got to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do this week, this next week, this next week. And then in 8 weeks or 12 weeks, I should be able to be ready. So you have to do a little bit of, predicting the future in terms of how people are going to respond. And so I think that's smart to figure out where you are right now so that you can start figuring out your increments and where you want to get to. And then you've got the finish line here and the beginning here. You got to match them up somewhere. So
Yeah. The other thing I think is in you're picking up exactly what I'm saying, but I think that you need to look at, once again, how many hours to start out your training per week as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So if you've been doing sprint and Olympic racing and you've been training 8 to 10 hours a week, which is completely fine,
Mm-hmm.
is that going to be enough to get you to a 70.3?
Right.
I would say it'd be really difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and the race day would be pretty unenjoyable for you if that's all you can commit.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, that being said, I'm not saying you need 20 hours. I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying you need to build. So if you had that 8 to 12 weeks and you're doing, I don't know, let's say you're doing 8 hours now, can you add an hour a week?
Right.
And it could be spread across all 3 disciplines, right?
Mm-hmm.
um so I think that would be something I would really concentrate on if I was working with somebody, or advising somebody, like, okay, let's just look at time to begin with. Like,
Yeah.
can you think of, okay, in March, do I have 15 hours a week?
Mm-hmm.
This is actually happening with some of the people I've worked with, where we kind of have this goal, and then they're like, oh, and I'm a teacher, and so spring break I'm not going to train.
Yeah.
You're like, oh goodness, well, that's 2 weeks till Oceanside,
Mm-hmm.
and this is kind of like the culminating time.
Yep.
Yeah, but we're going to Hawaii. I'm like, okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Can we swim and run and maybe rent a bike there and get? Well, no, it's family time. Like, okay, great. That is completely awesome.
Yeah.
But then let's not do Oceanside. Let's do St. George. Like, especially if you're building to that point.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? So I think
Totally.
you also need to look forward into your own personal calendar.
Well, it's funny you say that because I've got 10 tips here on building a program from my perspective. They have less to do with, the physiology, oddly enough, but more to do with things like this, is make a master schedule. In fact, I've got mine. I've got a hard copy and I've got the digital copy as well. And I
Yep.
put notes down on these and identify work events, conferences, maybe presentations or start of a semester, end of the semester. I can predict work-wise when there's going to
Yep.
be peak demand at work. And then I also put down personal events, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, vacations, whatever, we're talking about doing with the family or with each other or however that works out. And you got to put all these things down on paper because that's where you can sit back and say, oh, this race, oh yeah, oh, look at that. I'm going to be going to, a wedding, the week before the race. Okay. I want to say that you need to know that so you can plan around that
Yep.
personal event.
No, absolutely. Excuse me. So all those things need to be taken into account. The next thing I would look for, John, is in 70.3 racing, now you got to be able to get through the swim. So if you've only done sprint racing in 750, maybe your limit,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't make the swim cutoff,
Yep.
this is a big issue. The swim cutoff is it 70 minutes in 70.3? Is that right? 65,
Uh,
65 minutes?
what is it?
105? Is it 105?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's,
Okay. So if you can't get that done,
hmm,
well, you better concentrate on your swimming,
right.
right? And then the same thing, if you're biking, you can't make the bike cut off. You got to work on your bike. Like
Hmm.
if you just once again, we're looking at people that are just trying to do their first one and trying to finish. You have got a couple of metrics that you have to know and make.
Yeah.
So that's one that, especially for people that are coming from a non-swimming background.
Hmm.
And for me, like that, I came from a non-swimming background. I learned how to swim to do triathlon, and that was a real thing for me. Is like, okay, like I know I can swim 1500. Can I swim 19?
Yeah, right.
And can I swim 19? And my first race was at St. George in
Hmm.
57-degree water,
Yeah, right.
right? I still can vividly remember that first swim
Mhm.
I ever did at a 70.3, and my face being so frozen,
Yeah.
and I'd never swam in cold water like that,
Hmm.
and hyperventilating,
Yeah.
because of the shock of it. And
Hmm.
there was times in that swim, especially early on, I'm like, I can't do this,
Right.
right? So I think that looking at your strengths and weaknesses early as well, you
Hmm.
know, I said, you should be giving time to everything, but I number one thing is if you can't swim the distance in open
Hmm.
water, like I think you really have to address that first. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. I think, it's funny. I don't have a lot of training issues on my top training tips list, but
Yeah.
this is one that is really important, is being confident in the water and practicing skills that you may not have going into training for 70.3. Even if you come from a swimming background, you may not have open water swimming experience. Even more so, you may not have open water swimming in cold water, and or swimming in a wetsuit or swimming with a hoodie or whatever it is. And so one of my tips there is practice the details. Open water swimming, learn how to swim straight, practice sighting, practice adjusting your goggles in open water. All those things that you wouldn't necessarily be doing, from even if you're an experienced swimmer, you don't do those things in a swim pool. And so no, I think it's excellent to assess the fitness level of being able to do a 1.2 mile swim, let alone all the little details of doing an open water swim and covering hopefully 1.2 miles and not longer.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing with the swim is, and this is one you didn't hit on, is the amount of people, right?
Yeah, right, right.
If you've been doing local races where maybe there's 200, 300 people,
Hmm.
you can easily find open water.
Yep. Hmm.
In a 70.3,
Hmm.
like for example, Oceanside, is it 2,800 people at Oceanside?
Yeah.
There is no like time where you really have open water.
Mm-mm.
And you're seating yourself, and unless you're the last person to get in the water,
Yeah.
it's going to be crowded,
Hmm.
and that's something you just got to deal with, and you have to, once again, you have to prepare for. So
Yeah. And this
I
is where,
that's a detail.
yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, and this is where I'll put a plug in for our Tri Club events. Doing those, it's a good practice. We have maybe, usually around 50 people. That's a smaller group. It's not 2,800, but it's still a group. And even getting used to swimming with other people in that magnitude will be a step in the right direction with being able to swim with far more people.
Yeah. The next one I wanted to kind of get into is, I think a lot of triathletes that are getting into the sport, and are once again switching to the long distance, and this is something that I've experienced with many people that I've consulted and worked with, is they're trying to do too much intensity
Hmm.
and in their training. And when you switch from these shorter races to a longer race, the distance is more important, and the volume is more important than the intensity. And I'm a real big proponent of, especially as you go into your first one, is dial back the intensity and
Hmm.
just think, okay, can I do things longer? Can I
Hmm.
swim longer? Can I bike longer? Can I run longer? And that, I think, should be the focus, rather than, oh, I'm doing these interval sessions and I'm hitting these numbers, and that's not, once again, you're going to be there for 6 hours.
Hmm.
It's not going to be in at a high intensity. If it is, you're not going to finish.
Right.
So I think that that's another one that, and I was really lucky. I had somebody I was working with when I first started as that really kind of impressed that upon me, that I was,
Mhm.
especially running, I was running too fast.
Yeah.
And I was running the same kind of running I was doing to prepare for sprinting in Olympic. And, I'd do a 20K run and I'd be trashed, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
and I can still remember some of those finishing some of those runs, and it's my legs just kind of dying on me. And I didn't need to be running that fast.
Right.
And, we talk about it now, like, can you train the next day? Well, I
Mhm.
could train the next day, but it wasn't good.
Mhm.
And so that's a big piece of advice that I would give people is, with a 70.3, especially your first one, extend the time more than the intensity.
I like that, and that's a very nice, succinct way to sort of summarize that. In fact, that sort of hits on my top four tips, but
Okay.
I'll add this one on top of that is, and we advocate for this a lot on this show, is consistency of training. And consistency of training means you're doing it day in and day out. And if you do beat yourself up too much on one day by going into some high intensity work, then and that makes you suffer the next day or cancel a workout the next day, you've done that. That actually is a mistake in a training program. Now, I'll say from the science, high intensity interval training programs, they're very successful with eliciting a training response. However, we are talking lifestyle here, and we're talking long-term gains, and not even just looking at an 8-week window and then being done with it. So, consistency is important, and as you said, train at the intensity today so I can train again tomorrow. I think is a really good mindset to have. And and even though we've talked about consistency in the past, we don't mean do the same thing over and over again. You do need to have the ability to adapt
Yeah.
and evolve your training throughout the training program. But you are looking for more the volume, more the consistent number of workouts that you can get in within a week versus the higher intensity stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. What's your next one, John?
Well, my number one is probably one that you should have had as number one, or we didn't do this in order of importance. We
No,
just
we
did
did
this
not.
conversationally. Get to the start line injury free, which is
Yep.
related to the intensity part as well. Intensity is
Absolutely.
great, but you also run a risk of injury when you start going higher intensity, and lots of different types of injuries that can happen. But to have a successful day, you need to be on the start line injury free.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And once again, this is a conversation I literally just had with somebody,
Yeah.
um, who, they really, really want to have a very successful Oceanside because
Hmm.
they want to qualify for New Zealand.
Yep.
And they're kind of on the edge. And we talked about risk versus reward.
Hmm.
And we decided that we're going to take a risk this year,
Hmm.
and we're going to up the intensity of the running and the
Okay.
volume of running, because that's where this athlete tends to struggle, with the understanding that they might not get there healthy.
Yep. Hmm.
But this is a seasoned athlete that's done 5-6 years of triathlon,
Hmm.
and we're going to take a risk. But they're, once again, they've done like 20 70.3s.
Hmm.
This is not their first one.
Right.
Like,
Right.
that same athlete, if this was their first one, we wouldn't be taking these risks.
Hmm.
And so I think risk versus reward is big. And you're right. The risk, in my opinion, comes number one from intensity of running.
Yeah.
When you look at the research on triathlon injury, it's running with intensity that
Hmm.
causes injury, and too much running with intensity that
Yep.
causes injury.
Right. Right.
Especially when you haven't built the tendon and muscular strength to
Hmm.
withstand that. So understand that. Um, yeah, maybe you end up being 3 minutes slower in the race,
Hmm.
but you got to the start line, uh, you know, not injured. Well, that's all that really matters.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
But what's good about, you sitting back and having this discussion about risk reward, you have a lot of approaches, and I'm sure the athlete does as well, to respect the recovery process.
Yeah.
And if you do incorporate some intensity or, push the envelope a little bit, then the importance of having recovery so that you're not, so you are minimizing the risk of injury. That's the approach, and that's a great approach.
Yeah. And there's ways to do it, like in running. And this could be another podcast. Um, and you can drop the risk significantly by doing your intensity on hills.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, doing them, do high intensity up the hill, easy jog down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the downhill or even flat running that at speed that has even more increased risk of overuse injury.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of my little hacks I do with people is like, we're going to spend more time running hills with intensity, and then that's where we're going to gain that.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is in triathlon, people hate running up hills, and everyone slows
Mm-hmm.
down running up hills because they don't do that. They don't maybe do enough running up hills. So it's funny. I'm notoriously bad at running down hills
Oh yeah.
in races. I get
Yeah.
passed all the time running downhill,
Yeah.
and it's because I just don't want to take the risk
Right. Right.
in training to do downhill running with pace.
Yeah.
I don't know what your theory is on that, but
Oh,
you hear
I
that?
worry about I always worry about the downhill part.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I like you, I don't take the brakes off as much as I should. As the younger days, as a younger
yeah,
athlete, then you can sort of fly down those hills with no real concern. But as we get older, even if you take a spill or slip or what have you, it can wreak havoc on us.
yeah,
But you know what I like about what you're talking about with your athlete is this is a conversation with the two of you and you're planning for, whereas a lot of times if people are self-coached, especially, and they're left to their own, vice in terms of doing intensity, they may not have the wherewithal to know that they just did a hard workout. Now they got to take a day off or do a recovery, and they end up trying to stack these high intensity workouts from swimming, biking, and running, and all of a sudden you're 4 weeks into a program and you're like, I don't want to keep doing this. So
yeah,
I think the injury part, but the other one that goes along with this is you got to enjoy the journey,
yeah.
and having a good plan that does incorporate some intensity, but also complements that with some recovery. That's the artwork of this, but you have to enjoy this process from day one to the start line.
No, you're absolutely right, and you might not enjoy every minute of it. Like there are some hard
Sure.
things, and there's some hard times, and but yeah, you can mitigate those by, I think, by dropping the intensity down.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And along with this and sort of talking about a master schedule that we mentioned before, I always say triathlon is an individual sport, but we never do it alone. And so you not only do you need to enjoy their journey, but you need to make sure the others around you are seeing you enjoy your journey, and
Yeah,
they're enjoying it with you. Otherwise, that lifestyle can really wreak havoc on relationships and friendships and work relationships and what have you. So yeah, you got to build in the right level of intensity so that you're still able to enjoy the journey and the process of getting faster, but not neglecting other areas in your life.
agreed. Okay, what else you got?
My last one on intensity is minimum effective dose.
Yep.
So sometimes you just need to know what is the minimum effective dose so that you're going to get a training response. Obviously, this comes with lots of experience with training, but this is where you can get a coach, and that coach can help you identify what that minimum effective dose is. As much as I love training long distance myself, and we talk about the benefits of the volume, there's still times where you need to say, you know what, this week I just need to do a minimum effective dose, and then I can get back to some of the longer stuff. So yeah, you always got to be searching for that minimum effective dose.
Good. So my thing with the last thing I'll have with intensity, and we kind of talked about this with volume, is this should be a progressive overload,
Mm-hmm.
right? And really, really think about how much volume slash intensity you're doing per week
Mm-hmm.
as you build into your first 70.3. And don't increase it too much.
Right.
It is so easy when you start feeling good, right? Oh man, I did my first 10-mile run. I'm ready for 13. No, do another 10 mile the next week,
Hmm.
right? And maybe add, I don't know, maybe add 5 minutes to your run.
Hmm.
And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And really, really look at that. And more often than not, and I've talked to many coaches and listened to podcasts on this, oftentimes the coaches' biggest issue is pulling people back,
Hmm.
right? It's like they want to do
Yeah,
more,
right.
and you got to put the brakes on and really be, conscious of how much you're building, and understand that this is not necessarily a straight line.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
I'm going to add 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%. That's not a recipe in my mind for success either. It should be maybe you add 10% this week and you don't add any the next week. And then you
Hmm.
add 10%, and then you don't add any. Or
Hmm.
you add five, then don't add any. And let your body become accustomed to the new workload.
Hmm.
And the other thing is, and this is my experience as well, the older you are, the slower you need to go when you
Hmm.
add volume or intensity.
Hmm. It's slower the change.
Yep.
Yep. Hmm.
Yep. If once again, if you're 20, 25, 30, maybe even, like, you can do a lot more, and you
Yeah.
can add intensity a lot quicker. But as you get older, or add volume and intensity, as you get older, you got to go slower with it and allow
Hmm.
more time for adaptation.
Yeah.
Um, you know, as we get older, we're battling so many other things, and we're battling sarcopenia, which is basically your muscles
Hmm.
shrinking over time, and you're trying to build them, but they're trying to, genetics is trying to take them away.
Yeah.
And when you're in your 20s and 30s, that's not happening at the rate that's happening at when you get older. And so these are things you really need to think about as you go
Hmm.
into a 70.3. The other one is, and I didn't actually look at the training programs that Rick put, but we really have to be very careful in taking these training programs that maybe are not built for your age group
Hmm.
or your training history.
Hmm.
And so, I haven't, once again, I didn't look at them. Is there something for some that's 55 that is their, this going to be their first 70.3?
It's a plan.
Right. And you really need to think about that.
Hmm.
And, we talk about this all the time. The research is done on 20-year-olds,
Hmm.
and training plans are often built for people that are elite athletes.
Hmm.
And so as you prepare and you look at a training plan, you got to kind of think about, like, who was this originally built for?
Right.
Was it built for somebody that, once again, maybe they were a team sport athlete and they played soccer till they were 35, and they trained and they did all these things, and then they're going to jump into triathlon, or they were in the military and they just retired from the military and they were doing all sorts of things. And yeah, they can jump into that program. But if you know, I don't say you're a couch potato, but if you were a couch potato and you've gotten into triathlon and you've done a few, and you're going to jump into a 70.3, it probably isn't the same training program for you.
Hmm. Hmm.
So really think about that, especially if you're just going to go buy a training program online or buy a book that's got training plans. You really need to think about that.
No, I love that. And I love this idea of progression and bring it up. This goes right along with our get to the start line injury free, because the catchphrase is, and we both use this all the time in teaching, is too much change too fast. That's usually the source of some type of injury. And so I think the other part that you brought up, which I think is really good to emphasize, is people shouldn't get caught up in how many hours per week they're putting in, or listening to other stories. Oh, I do 15 hours a week, because that's not a static number. It's
Yeah.
always going to be changing. You're going to be progressing throughout your training program to some peak amount of time, and then sort of bringing it back from that. So I think that's a good sort of a word for people to at least keep an eye on. Don't get caught up in the average hours that you need to prepare for a race, because it's going to be dynamic.
Or the miles,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
right.
So, this is something that I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe notorious for,
Mm-hmm.
is I don't think you need to run 13 miles to do a 70.3.
Right.
Like your long run does not have to be that. You can,
Mm-hmm.
there's many people I've trained that they never ran over 9 miles until
Yep.
they did a 70.3, and they were very successful
Mm-hmm.
because we built volume in other ways. And once again, if you're sitting here and you're running 5 miles, is your kind of like your long run, and you're thinking 8 weeks down the road, I want to run 13,
Mm-hmm.
and you build up to that point. Once again, it's a risk
Right.
where you can get to 9, and once you can run 9 miles and you can run it comfortably, you can run
Yeah.
13.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of like the old marathoner thing. Well, you got to run a marathon before you can do a
Yeah.
marathon.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think maybe you can, and maybe you could if you've got the time. But if you're doing once again a shorter build,
Mm-hmm.
you might not have to get there.
Yeah.
I will say you have to run. You should be able to ride 56 before you do a 70.3.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
I will
Right.
say that one because
Well,
there's
it's the
it's different.
risk reward part, because the problem with running is the longer you go, the higher intensity you go, either one of those, you're increasing your risk of injury. And
Yep.
so I think that's what you're really zeroing in on with that is, but with biking and even swimming, I mean, you can do both of those longer
Yep.
with lower risk of injury than doing the running.
Yep. It's so funny, John, that almost half of this conversation has been about mitigating injury.
Yeah, right, right.
Um,
Get to the start line injury free.
but it's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's the crux of it's the keystone to building a program, because you're trying to progress so you don't get injured. Obviously, if we take a week now and then if we even go back to either of our training programs and we pull out a 12-week versus a 1 week, and we go try to do the 12th week program right now, we won't be able to do it without the risk of injury.
exactly.
It's um, it's a progression.
Yep.
All right, I got sort of a fun one here.
Okay, let's
You
go.
got to be able to predict the future. So you got to say, I'm going to be training for whatever 12 weeks. My training shoes are going to get worn out along the way. And so you've got to predict the future and make sure that you're replacing your running shoes, especially, again, the injury issue. But other things, tires, tubes, whatever it is, swimsuit, goggles, you need to predict the future that your gear will break down and you need to be ready to have something to replace it so that you're not going time searching for a new pair of shoes and now you're trying to adapt to that. That can really throw some disruption at week 9 or 10 of a 12-week training program.
Yeah. And then, especially if you're doing an early season race, you're going to need a wetsuit.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So if you don't have one, like now, once again, is the time probably to buy one. Make sure it fits, and if it doesn't fit, you got time. You don't be like, oh, I'm in 2 weeks away. Oh, it's going to be kind of cold, the water. I'm
Mm-hmm.
probably going to need a wetsuit,
Yeah.
and doing things last minute. So yeah, you're right.
Well, you're hitting on the second part of this one is look at the weather race conditions, whether or not you need cold water gear,
Yep.
whether or not what kind of bike clothing are you going to wear. Not every race is Kona, so you don't always just go with a singlet that you would wear in high temperatures, and so you need to be thinking about these things as you're preparing, because shopping for the right gear and getting the right gear for that race. But then the other part that is right with what you just said is choose the appropriate gear. You don't always need the top line. It depends on your goal and what you're looking for, whether it's the helmet, the wetsuit, or the running shoes. Maybe maybe we don't all need carbon plated shoes, and we've talked about these shoes in the past, or we don't all need the $1,000 wetsuit. We could probably do just fine with $100 wetsuit.
No, you're absolutely right. And the other thing I would say is listen to some of our old podcasts.
Yeah, totally.
We've done several podcasts
Yeah.
on race gear and cold weather
Mhm.
gear, hot weather gear,
Mhm.
decisions we'd make around weather, and um, or find a mentor, find somebody that's done racing in different temperatures.
Yeah.
Um, it's so funny. the 70.3 Worlds this year for men especially was really cold and
Hmm.
really rainy and really wet. And as I was, 5 weeks away, I was still planning on going. I didn't even have that in my radar.
Hmm.
Right? Well, Finland in the end of August, it's going to be
Yeah.
beautiful, right?
Right. Right.
And I still wonder, would I have been prepared properly, right?
Hmm.
I needed Morro Bay gear, but I would probably been, you know, I don't know, more oceanside level gear.
Yeah.
And yeah, you gotta do that. And for even for someone like me that's raced a ton and raced all over the world, I I still like, would I have had the right rain gear? Would I have had the
Yeah.
right
Right.
stuff?
Right.
Or would I have been scrambling the day before?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's good. I mean, you're just speaking to the importance of just sort of planning ahead and looking at the course. I think the other thing you can do for prep in 70.3 is read race reports. I take them with a grain of salt, but at the same time, a lot of times you can get some nice little nuggets of information. You
Yeah.
know, it's always going to change from year to year in terms of weather conditions, and so you don't always get, the full, sort of picture of what's going on. But there are some little details that you can get sometimes that really do help you out, and sometimes it's, gear talk or what people wore during an event.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned the tires, but for my first 70.3, actually for all my 70.3s, new tires.
Yeah, yeah, right.
You don't want to, if this is like kind of your A race, you built everything towards this,
Hmm.
it's your first one, don't get a flat tire. So
Hmm.
new tube if you're doing tubes,
Yeah.
new tires, and
Hmm.
it will, it definitely decreases your risk of getting a flat tire.
Yeah, yeah.
And all of the money you're going to invest, just the entry fee, right?
Hmm.
You're looking at $400 entry
Yeah,
fees now.
right.
You're probably going to need a hotel. You're going to travel there. Um, yeah, just spend the money and get a set of new tires. I think it's
No, I love it. I'm going to go back to one because I only got one more.
yeah,
Is we talked about practicing the details in open water swimming. The other details that you can practice beyond just your training load are transitions,
yeah.
doing things on the bike, like being able to pick up a water bottle from someone handing it off. And obviously, we're there's the whole nutrition part that you've got to practice, and we've got episodes dedicated to nutrition. But there's always those little details, or sometimes big details, that you can think ahead and practice those. So by the time you come around to race day, you already know what you're going to do on transition. You already know how to pick up a water bottle from someone while you're biking or what have you.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And understand there are lots of aid stations, right?
Yeah,
If you've done just sprint racing, there might not have been any aid stations,
yeah, right, right.
right? Definitely not on the bike. And
No.
so understanding that, in a 70.3 race that you probably aren't going to be able to carry as much, maybe you might not be able to carry as much fluid as you would want.
Hmm.
And then, you're talking about details. This was on my list is having your bike kind of dialed in to carry
Yep.
everything, right?
Yep.
Because it's different. You're gonna, can you carry 3 water bottles? Do you need to
Hmm.
carry three? Can you carry two and then pick up one?
Yep.
Do you have spots for the nutrition? And have you thought about
Hmm.
the
Yep.
calories that, and once again, you said it right. We've had podcasts on this,
Mhm.
but do you have the right setup to go long,
Yep.
in particular on the bike?
Right.
And then same with the run. Like, do you have a suit that you can carry the nutrition you want, or are you going to
Hmm.
rely completely on the course? For an Ironman race, it's great. Like, you could pretty much not bring anything on the run.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
an aid station every mile, and
Hmm.
um, it's funny nowadays. Like, for most of the 70.3 racing, I don't take anything onto the run.
Hmm.
You know, Actually, I have a little cramped juice that I bring, but other than that, for food and drink, I'm like, that first aid station is, if I need something, I'm gonna start there. And
Yeah.
um so it's just something to once again kind of mentally prepare for and plan for.
No, I love it. Okay, so my last one, I'll combine these two. Plan your race week and plan your post race week. So, and by planning, I mean, and I think we did an episode on this entirely is plan, make sure you've got your travel, your accommodations, what you're going to be doing, how you're going to get there, what's the race week look like from logistics of doing packet pickup and bike setup and T1, T2, whatever it is. But try to plan that all out ahead of time. That will reduce the stress and the strain on the mental aspect of doing a 70.3 if you're comfortable with what's going to happen on race week.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, and you're gonna have to pick your packet up the day before and
Mhm.
put your bike in the day before. I
Mhm.
have no idea why. It's the dumbest thing in triathlon. If I was king of triathlon,
Mhm.
which maybe one day I'll be, you could vote
Right,
for me,
right.
or have a revolution. You have to put your bike in the day before,
Yeah.
and and I've told this to people that are going to the 70.3, and they well, Ted, well, why do they make you do that? Why can I not ride my bike in the morning? Because my hotel is only 2 miles away. I just ride my bike in, and I wouldn't have to drive in. Well, they don't let you because someone was once again the king of triathlon, and they decided that you can't do this.
Mhm.
I'm being completely facetious here. I don't know if that's the right word. But it's the dumbest thing in the world. But be prepared for that. Like
Mhm.
you once again, you're booking your hotel. It's 2 miles away, and I'll just ride my bike in the morning.
Mhm.
That's not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, John, do you know why?
Uh, Other than it, just the race logistics of getting people, 2,000 plus people into a transition area, uh, it, it, it can take some time and better to, I can think of races where I stood in line for, um, an hour trying to get into transition. It was, pre to when they scheduled it out. Because at some of the bigger races, they're taking a picture of your bike so that in case there's any damage afterwards, there's all the, all that.
Don't take a picture of your bike anymore. I haven't had my
Well,
picture
that
since
again, that
2014.
that was
That was a
that
thing.
was back in the day, but that was something that they were doing because there were a number of claims for damages to bikes.
Yeah, because they're
So
making you rack it the day before. If you just rack it in the morning,
here you go.
right? This
Yeah,
to me is the dumbest thing, and we're gonna have a whole podcast on
maybe
this
we,
thing. We're gonna bring someone in, and they're gonna explain to me
yeah,
why we have to do that.
there you go.
Because I've had more problems getting my car and getting parking and
Yeah.
all these other issues. Which when I'm like a mile away or 2 miles away, I could just ride my bike in.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Yeah, and that's all good. And we
Yep.
we should have an episode on rules we don't understand.
Yep.
I think that would be a fun episode. So, it's all good. So, hey, this has been fun to talk
Yep.
about 70.3. I think I'm ready to register for something for 2024. I haven't registered for anything yet. So
Yeah, you got time.
I need to get off I could get my mouse working here tonight.
It's so funny, as I continue to struggle with my health. I was thinking about I'm, may or may not be able to do the only race I've signed up for is St. George. And I was like thinking today, I'm like, why do I even sign up?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just wait till the end. Like, in plan it, like I'm gonna go,
Right.
but pick races that aren't gonna sell out. St. George is not gonna sell out. And just the week of, just sign up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Look, the only downside is I don't get my name on the t-shirt that I don't care about anyways.
Yeah, right, right, right. Well, in a race like St. George, it won't sell out. So,
Yeah. So I
so
don't care.
yeah,
Now, Oceanside, which will sell out,
yeah.
I think, has it sold out?
I don't know. It probably has.
Different. That's a different scenario. So the race isn't going to sell out. It hasn't sold out historically. I'm not signing up ahead of time anymore.
Mm-hmm,
Life
mm-hmm.
is
There you
just too
go.
random. Too many things happen. And
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, good stuff, man.
yep,
Well, rest up this weekend. Get
I'm
healthy.
gonna try. We're gonna start work next week.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Got to put that on the schedule.
Yeah. Oh shoot. Yeah, work's not on my schedule yet. I got to get that going. But yeah, you have a good weekend too, John, and hope you get some good training in. It's supposed to be kind of chilly this weekend.
It's gonna be cold. We're gonna have a little bit of winter here.
Yeah, yeah. So it's maybe some indoor this weekend, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome,
Hey, good
John.
talking.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye bye.